Hey, Jason, thanks for joining me today, brother.
Great to be on your show, John. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, dude, so tell me your story, man. Where were you born?
I was born in Rochester, New York, but I only lived there for about a year. And when I was about a year old, my mom and my dad moved me to back to home where they were from, which was Albany, New York. So if you ask me where I was born, I'd say Rochester because that's the actual answer. But I'm actually from Albany, New York, and that's where I spent the majority of my childhood into my teen years growing up in upstate New York.
Now, siblings?
Yeah, two younger brothers. So I'm the oldest of three boys, and three boys in the house. I mean, that's chaos, right? And that's what it was. It was chaos.
You know what? I'm one of three boys, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Now, growing up and doing what you're doing now, kind of your story, and we'll get into the kind of the ESPN thing in a minute.
Yeah,
Was it the Jets or the Giants? Who were you a fan of?
neither. So I'm a diehard Dallas Cowboys fan. That I don't know exactly how that came, but my dad's a Giants fan, and he grew up, in the '60s rooting for the Giants and Y.A. Tittle and Frank Gifford and the legends back then. And when I was born, he was watching sports. My love of sports comes from him. But somewhere in the late '70s, I discovered the Cowboys, and they must have been playing the Giants one day, or maybe they were the game after the Giants. And in New York, it was always the doubleheader on a Sunday, and the Giants would play at 1, and sometimes the Cowboys, or most of the time, the Cowboys would play at 4. And so I saw the team with the star in the helmet. And I told my dad when I was 5 or 6, he tells me, I tell the story of, Dad, I want to root for that team with the star in the helmet. And he's like, no, son, we root for the team with the Giants on the helmet. And I said, that's not my team though, Dad. I want to root for the team with the star. That's my team. And he tried to sway me away from it, but that's my team. I've stuck with them since. Here I am in my mid 40s, and I'm still a diehard Dallas Cowboys fan. So,
Dude, that is a great story. Especially being in New York and
oh
your
yeah.
dad being a Giants fan, bro, because that can't be very popular up there, right?
Well, it initially no, but it's funny. They were called America's Team. I think it was 1978 that NFL Films coined them America's Team. And you really started to see that. Like as I got older and 10, 11, 12 years old, I started to have a lot of friends in school, and a lot of them were Cowboy fans. So this is in New York State, and in the capital city in Albany. So there were a lot of Cowboy fans, not a ton, but definitely enough to where you saw this was a team that kind of transferred over from just Dallas into the entire country. And as I got older, especially in the 90s, when I was in my early 20s, you saw them win Super Bowls, a lot of them, three of them, and a lot of fans were coming out of the woodwork there. So I was up in the Syracuse, Western Finger Lakes region of New York in college, and there were tons of Cowboys fans there. So they travel pretty well.
So tell me the story, dude, of how the out of college young man going to work for ESPN and kind of, what's brought you to where you are today.
Yeah. So growing up, I was always a diehard sports fan, as we just talked about, and I got to high school and realized that I wasn't going to be a professional athlete as much as that's my dream and everybody's dream, really, when you think about big sports fans in their formative years. So I went to college to become a broadcaster, to go into sports broadcasting. That was my goal from the time I was 18. And I finally finished after a couple of years of taking off at 22, 23. And that was my dream. That was my goal. And I chased it. I went after it. Coming out of college, I worked in local radio in my hometown in Albany, New York. And I was a morning show and an afternoon show radio producer for 3 years. Lots of fun. Never had more fun than I had working in those local shows back in the day. But eventually an opportunity opened up on the web in the infancy of the World Wide Web back in the late 90s and early 2000s of a job at ESPN as a radio producer for the network in Bristol, Connecticut, which is where I still am now. And I applied. I got a call. I went. I sat down with 5 different people. We had to take a sports quiz, which you want to talk about agonizing as far as, am I going to get the answers right? Are they trying to trick me? But I got a call. I'm giving you the short version, by the way, John, but I got a call and they offered me a position, and my wife and I had just been married, and I had to do a little convincing with her, but not too much, thankfully, because we were still without kids and just getting started, and, um, took the job and moved out here to Bristol, Connecticut. My wife came with me, and, I've been out in Bristol here since 2000, so 20 years. But I had a great 17-year career at ESPN, working as a radio producer, working as a television producer and a booker, and finishing up in their social media, digital media world, all basically as a producer. That's sort of the general title I held. And it was a blast. It really was.
Dude, I didn't realize you were there 17 years.
17 years. Yeah. From 2000, I left in February of 2017. I got there in July of 2000. So just under 17 years. Yep.
So you saw the whole transition from like Boomer to all the current day guys. I mean, you know what, dude? Boomer, that guy, he was one of those guys. He made that show early on because I think guys like me just like you identified with the guy, you know?
Yeah. I love Chris Berman, and I was fortunate to work with him for about 6 years or so in a not direct capacity, but we were both working on the NFL at the same time. So I was able to work with him in the war room. We called it the war room on Sundays, where we'd all go in and watch football games for, 7 hours straight. It was amazing. But I got to know Boom a little bit, and what a genuine guy. Like, he is a guy's guy. And I watched him. I actually wrote about this in my new book coming out in July, about the leadership that he exemplified by the way that he treated the person that could do nothing for him. That was Chris Berman. He was friends with the janitor. He was friends with the cashier in the cafeteria. He was friends with the producer and the equal host of his, if you will, on air on ESPN. So this dude treated everybody the same, and I saw it. I witnessed it. I loved working with Boom. What a legend. I mean, he is a ESPN legend through and through. And I'm glad they bring him back every so often to do some work, because I know he's kind of semi-retired away from ESPN. But every so often they'll bring him back and they'll have him do a few things, and it just brings a big smile and a great joy to me to watch him, because he's a legend. He really is.
Dude, I went to Baylor, and I think Trey Wingo was a Baylor guy, wasn't he?
Yes, he is. Yep. Trey's another guy who's a good friend, and I worked with Trey for many years. Tremendous guy, and super talented. Trey was. He's a Baylor guy, though. Yeah, he's a Baylor Bear.
I remember seeing something on TV or something early on. I remember thinking, okay, I could take a little pride in, and I had
That's right.
a brother there.
Yeah, he's Baylor Bears finest. That's for sure. He talks about Baylor a lot.
That's cool. Let's talk about your father, man, in your book, the first book that you wrote.
Yeah.
Tell me that story. Like, give me the story, because I know it's a powerful story of forgiveness, but kind of give me the story of the background of your father and just how that all came to be.
Yeah. So my dad, as I like to say, he was in my life, but he wasn't really present. My mom and dad divorced when I was just right before I would turn 6 years old. So I really don't have much, any memories really of them being together. So the memories I have was always of a broken family, if you will, or a separated family. And my mom had custody, so we spent the majority of our time with her. On the weekends, we would go see my dad, and occasionally on other days, but it was mostly weekends. And that really kind of took shape from the time I was 7 or 8 years old, all the way till I was, into my teen years, into my high school years. And my dad and I, it was weird. We bonded over sports, right? And we loved sports. We would watch games. Some of my earliest memories of watching sports were with my dad. But my dad, when he was watching sports, often was drinking. And a lot of people can drink and watch a sporting event and not have it consume them or take over their lives. My dad was not that person. He was a Jekyll and Hyde. When he was sober, he's the nicest guy you'll ever meet. When he would drink, and he did it quite often, he was not the nicest guy. He was a very angry drunk who would verbally say some things, and many things actually, that he regretted. And I saw the sort of early stages of this growing up. I tell the story of when I was 7 or 8 years old, my dad would take me to the bar with him, and we would watch sports, and then he would give me a quarter, buy me a soda, and tell me to go play pinball or the arcade. For an 8-year-old kid, that's a great night. Yeah, let's go play some pinball. Let's go watch some sports. Let's drink some soda. But little did I know that my dad was at the bar getting wasted, and it was a very unhealthy environment, to say the least, for me to be a part of. As I got older, I started recognizing right away that what he was doing, in essence, with the alcohol and drinking was not a good thing. I started, getting in the car with him when he would be drinking and seeing him swerve, seeing him scream and yell at his second wife, Patty, my stepmom, and them having really heavy duty arguments. I would see him violently, never physically touch us, but violently scream and yell and call us names, especially as we got older. So it was a very confusing, we'll say, relationship for many years. As I got older and got into college, went away to college, which I think partially was a boundary that I had set, not intentionally, but looking back, I see what it was, to separate myself from my dad. And then as I got out of college and started kind of developing into this career and eventually getting married and having a daughter, I had a life to live. And so my dad was in my life still. We would periodically be talking on the phone and talk about sports a lot. But he lived an up and down roller coaster life of drunk, sober, trying to get sober for 40 years. And it was difficult. It was very difficult.
Now, is he still alive?
He is. Yep. He's 69 years old. So he's still alive, still lives in Albany, New York. And yeah, so he's basically retired, I guess you could call it that. In 1995, my dad had, for many years, he was a driver's ed teacher and a high school teacher, a history teacher. And he had a great job. And unfortunately, the alcohol, which was taking its toll around 91, is when it really first started festering for him. He lost his job in 1995 because of his alcoholism. Showed up drunk one day to work, and that was the end of that. But in a weird way, with the system, the way that New York State works, he was able to file for some benefits because of the disease that he had. And through that, he's been living now for the past 25 years off of these benefits, if you want to call them, or disability benefits from the fact that the disease caused him not to be able to have a job. It's really weird. When I say that, I almost feel like he's cheating the system. I don't think he's cheating anything, but the system is the system. And it's allowed him, unfortunately, for many years to have a steady income. So he was never going rock bottom and losing everything because he always had those benefits to kind of continue. And today he's sober, which we'll get to that story in a minute, but he's living off those benefits and, just living his life. Yeah.
With my story and many men's story, I think there's the idea, and Eldridge does such a good job in pointing this out. And
Yeah.
and he talks about specifically in our movie about, until we get to the root of why you're an addict, why you're medicating, you will continue to medicate. But until you get to that
Sure.
root and heal that, let's find freedom and peace from that.
Yeah.
Then you can throw medicine at it all you want. You can do whatever you want. Was there something you think in that your dad was, well, why was he medicating? Any idea?
Um, I don't know if I know the full answer to that question. I would say, um, for that reason of what medication is, right? It's the temporary relief of something. It takes you, I know people who will go and have a couple of drinks and I don't know if I call them alcoholics, but they do it to take away the pain or to numb the pain. That was the reason, I think, why my dad drank for so many years. Was he was in a lot of pain. 2 divorces, my mom and then my stepmom, Patty, broken relationships with his kids. There was a lot of pain that he was going through that I didn't really see when I was going through this with him 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I just saw a man who was sober or was drunk, and I wanted him to get sober. And I didn't see his pain. I didn't have any empathy towards my dad. But I think he was going through a lot of pain, and the only thing that he knew to ease that pain or to take away that pain was the alcohol, and it just numbed everything up. The unfortunate thing was, he didn't go quietly into the night with his drinking and just go to bed and wake up the next morning trying to take on the next day. He was, like I said, very verbally abusive. When he became drunk, he would do things that he would never do sober, which was, pick up the phone and call everyone looking for sympathy, looking for somebody to feel sorry for him. And when that didn't take place a lot of times with me and my brothers, he would lash out. He would call us names that I would never repeat to any person, much less somebody that, I cared for and was my son or my dad. So we saw, even though he would always say it was the alcohol that was speaking, to me, it was still my dad. It was coming out of his mouth. It was physically him talking to me. So it was my dad speaking, even though it was the alcohol. But I'm not quite sure exactly what the reasoning is, but I have to guess it was because of what it made him feel like, because he enjoyed it. He would tell me, even though he would do a lot of things that he didn't enjoy, he would tell me he enjoyed the drinking. You know, it was something that he felt good when he would throw, that alcohol into his system, whatever it was.
There's so much shame too, and you said it, and that could very much be, it's the shame, unworthiness, all that regret,
A
right?
lot of
Of
that.
I haven't been the husband or the man or the father I needed to be, and that leads to so much of that. For me, it was, I loved drinking because I didn't have to face the reality.
Yeah.
The I say it many times. I didn't want to face this monster in the mirror that I'd created and all my past and all the stuff. And it's like I was doing everything I could to run from God, and the drinking helped me do that. And it justified all my behavior. I could do anything I wanted to if I was drinking. I would, what you said about
Yeah.
your father is a lot the way I feel. It's like I'm a pretty calm, quiet. Well, not quiet, but I'm a pretty calm guy. But when I was drinking, I was good time Johnny,
Yeah.
the wilder, the better, you know,
Yeah.
because I needed that affirmation from other people that I didn't get growing up from a father. Let me ask you, did you know anything about your dad's dad?
Oh yeah, my dad's dad is the greatest man I've ever known. He's my grandfather, George Romano. Dedicated my book to him. Uh, he, in essence, stepped in when my dad wasn't around. He was not an alcoholic. He did not have any drinking issues. He did drink occasionally. He'd have, I remember the old Genesee beer in the fridge, and he'd have like a beer a day, maybe every other day, maybe. I mean, it was much different than the way my dad drank. And I saw him a gentle, kind, quiet man who was, like I said, the greatest man I've ever known. And he was the opposite of my dad. My dad, I think, extended a lot of tendencies that my grandmother, his wife, my grandfather's wife, had. And I think that when I look back now, I see that my dad, I think, struggled a lot because of the way my grandmother was in terms of worrying, in terms of, anger issues, things like that, that maybe my grandfather didn't exude. But yeah, he was Pa. That's what we called him, and I miss him every day. He died in 2007, so 13 years ago almost. But he he was he was there when my dad wasn't. Let's just put it that way.
You know what, dude? And you're so blessed that you had some man step in and be that role model, because there's so many guys that don't. And I know as you speak, you can hear in your voice how much it really meant to you. One of the things I think I dealt with was there was never a man that stepped in there. And so I was kind of mad at God and my dad and everybody else, you know,
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
was that anger that I was medicating. And so, dude, that is such a blessing. Let me ask you now fast forward to the point with your father and the forgiveness piece.
Yeah, so we're fast forwarding many years now. We're coming up to 2013. So at this point, my dad is about 63 or so. I'm, just getting ready to turn 40, and, enter into the next phase of life, as they say, at 40 years old. And, my dad is at this point in a really bad state. So in the 90s, in the 2000s, he had missed all the pillar moments of my life, my high school graduation, my college graduation, my marriage, my wedding, and certainly the birth of our daughter. Like, he was either drinking in a rehab center or just not available to attend and be a part of those big moments in my life. So I watched my dad just continue to crumble, and he had good moments. There were moments where he would be sober for 6 months or a year, and he was really trying. I tell people, my dad is a fighter and continued to be a fighter for many years. But every time he relapsed or fell back, it was bad. Like, it wasn't just, oh, dad had a couple drinks and hopefully he'll get sober again. No, it was bad. It was, and I depict a lot of this in the book about times that he would call and say these nasty things and write these nasty things. And it was bad. It was just really bad. So by 2013, he was at his worst. And when I say that, it's because somewhere about a year or two before that, my dad, he had the drinking issue, but now he's compounding that with a severe case of depression and mental illness. And so when you put those two together, you're talking about a recipe for disaster. You really are. And so my dad was at his lowest point. and the depression was really starting to creep in. The only way he thought he could combat the depression was by drinking. And then again, you put those two together and it wasn't a good thing. So by middle of 2013, he's at his lowest point. And there was a day in the middle of June around my daughter's birthday, around that time, it wasn't on her birthday, but I got a call, and it was from a nurse at a hospital in Albany, New York. And I had gotten calls from nurses before, but this was a different call, and usually the nurse would call and say, hey, we have your dad here. He's in detox. Just wanted to keep you aware of, your dad's in the area of the hospital trying to, dry out. And he had been in and out of detoxes for many years. Well, this call was different because this was the call that the woman on the other line said, Jason, your dad is here. He tried to end his life last night. And that was different. My dad had actually, in his bad states of mind when he was drinking, threatened to kill himself. We always thought he was just saying that because he was, drinking and trying to get us to feel sorry for him, which he was very good at, very manipulative in his words. But this time it was actually true. He tried to end his life, and he was unsuccessful. Obviously, I gave away earlier that he's still alive, but he was unsuccessful. But it was weird for me, John, because at that moment when I got the call, and I tell this story a lot when I speak to audiences, I tell them that, and I say it to you too, I was numb. Like I had no empathy and no feelings, no sadness for him. I just was numb. And she told me, hey, if you want to come visit him, he's here in the hospital. We have him in the psych ward. And I just said, no, I'm good. Thank you very much. And I hung up the phone. And for about a week, I didn't really even tell many people. I just kind of dealt with it in my own personal mind. At this point, I am a Christian, so my faith is very important to me. And I've been one for about 10 years or so. But even at that point, it wasn't even about God or anything. I was just kind of numb to it because I've been through it for 40 years. And then a week later, my dad gives me a call on the phone from the psych ward. I get a call, and I answer. I just say hello, and he goes, "Hey, Jay," and that's how he usually started his way of talking to me. But this voice that I heard on the other end was different than any voice I'd ever heard from my dad before. It was a lifeless voice. It was empty. It was void. It was dark. It was death in many ways in the way that he was talking. And without him even having to say anything else, at that moment, just hearing those two words and the tone of his voice, I developed something I hadn't had from my dad ever, and I've alluded to it already. It was empathy. And through that empathy, I saw a man who was broken. I saw a man who had lost it all. I saw a man who did not want to be in the place that he was in. I saw a man that God loved. And that was weird for me because for many years, I always thought God loved me, but my dad, nah, he's a mess. He doesn't really care for him and love him too much. But that was the moment. I just heard his voice. And so I verbally told him, Dad, I'm so sorry for what you're going through. And I want you to know that I forgive you. I'm sorry for what you're going through. And we're going to get through this. I didn't even know what that meant. Telling him I forgave him wasn't an instantaneous weight off my shoulder. But when I've looked back, and certainly in writing the book and talking a lot about forgiveness, I realized that I had this bitterness, this anger, this hatred towards him and towards the disease and the pain that he had caused for so many years, that I'd never fully processed what forgiveness was about until the beginning of that process taking place that day when my dad called me. And from there, I really started to begin what I call the process of a daily walk of forgiveness in my life, not just with my dad, but just in life. But it took me a long time to get there. I don't know if I'm even there yet, but that was the beginning of what became a situation in my life where I was able to truly forgive my dad.
I think so many men, it's such a powerful story. So many men are angry, or in women too, are angry at their dad for
sure.
a similar thing, right? And that anger, and much as we want to deny it, it's affecting us. It is. And one of the guys in the movie, Larry North, does this great story about very similar story as yours. Dad was an alcoholic, was gambling, blah blah blah. His dad never thought he did anything to his son. He's like, what are you talking about? You know, and his son was just angry. And he said his dad was on his deathbed at the phone call. And the nurse says, you better get up here. Your dad's probably not going to make it much longer. And he says he walks in the room, grabs his dad's hand. His dad's just out of it, not responsive. And he says, you know, I just said all these things to him. He says, I walk out of the room. He says, the nurse comes up to me with tears rolling down her eyes. And she says, hey, Larry, I didn't want to tell you this
Hmm.
before you walked in, but he passed away about an hour earlier. And he said, I didn't do that for him. I did that for
Hmm.
me.
Yeah.
And that is so important. I know it was impacting my life. I was a pissed off, angry guy at my old man and at God and at everybody because my dad had abandoned me. And I'm sure that abandonment thing, right? That was probably part of it, is your anger.
Yeah, it was. There was a lot of anger. And, you know, when I became a dad, I think I got even more angry at my own dad because I saw, um, you know, what that feeling was like to be a father and to take care of my daughter. And, you know, my goal is with my daughter, and it's been this way for 16 years now, was to just be the opposite of what my dad was, you know, to be present, to love her. I fail at this. I yell at her. I do things that every dad does that's just stupid and I regret, but I wanted to be the opposite of what my dad was. I wanted to be present in her life. And I'm probably too present in her life, as she would say, today at 16 years old. And dad, just leave me alone. But I was set on being the dad that my dad wasn't for me. And I had a lot of anger when I saw how could you do that to your kids, is my feeling, right? When I see my daughter and I would never want to do that to her. And it helped me understand, I think, the disease of alcoholism, which I didn't look at it as a disease. I was just like, stop drinking. But it's a disease. It's an addiction. It really is. And I've never dealt with really severe addictions personally. So I can't empathize in the sense of understanding what he was going through. But the pain and the anger that I had, when I finally came to a place where I began the process of forgiveness, it was just like the guy said in your movie, it was exactly the same for me. It was not about my dad. The idea of forgiveness, I say this all the time, is a great quote from Lewis Smedes, the theologian. He says, to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover the prisoner is you. And that nails what it was for me. When I forgave my dad, I realized it had nothing to do with anything that he had ever done. It was all about the bitterness and the anger and the wrath and the clamor, as it says in Ephesians 4, that I had carried inside of me. I was trapped in this bitterness. I was trapped in these chains of anger. It was like poison. Every time I got angry at him and seeped back at him, it would just grow and grow inside of me. And I realized when I started the process of forgiveness, that started to free me up. And there wasn't this bitterness anymore. Now, did I still have issues with forgetting and moving forward? Yeah, of course, because you never forget what you went through. You know, for so many years. I mean, wrote a whole book on all these stories that I had obviously not forgotten, but it allowed me to move forward, which is the subtitle of the book, Moving Forward When Someone We Love Hurts Us. It allowed me to move forward in my own walk with the Lord. And honestly, it freed me up to have a better relationship with God, because Paul says in Ephesians 4, let all bitterness and anger and wrath be put away from you. Be kind to one another, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave us. And for me, that was the big thing, like as God in Christ. So I'm going and waking up every day as this Christian guy, asking God to forgive me of the stupid things that I say, the stupid things that I do, the stupid things that I think. And yet I was not able to exude that back onto my dad or anyone else. I was just living a life of hypocrisy. I was a hypocrite. And so now I understood that freedom that forgiveness allowed me to do was to move forward and really draw closer into being more of who God wants me to be, which is like him. He created us in his own image. And, you know, I want to be careful here too, John, because I say this a lot. Forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. And I think that's a misnomer that a lot of people hear because they hear the great, amazing reconciliation stories. They may hear my story. My dad and I have reconciled. But other people, the pain is just too much, or the damage is just too much for any reconciliation to take place. But where reconciliation is not always possible, forgiveness is. every single time. Jesus tells us in Matthew 18, every single time we are to forgive when someone hurts us. Again, not easy, but it's a command. And so I had to really search my soul there and say, okay, if he's telling me every single time, I got to start trying to live that way. Again, not easy. The human nature in us doesn't always allow us to do that. But that's why we have the Spirit of the Lord inside of us, at least those who are believers. And I think that's helped me really move forward in a way that's healthy in this whole process with my father.
You know, in so many cases, and the people that reach out and we have conversations, a lot of times the dads don't even know they need to be forgiven, right? So in
Yeah.
that reconciliation piece, yeah, you can forgive him, but there may not be reconciliation because he believes he's done absolutely nothing wrong. And
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
There's no
and
doubt.
that happens over and over and over because I see it with so many people. They're like, well, what am I supposed to do? He's still a jerk, or he won't talk to me, or whatever. And you go, you know what? Again, you try to bring him back to, it's not about him.
Yeah.
Your forgiveness for him is about you. And so I know in my own story, when I was going through this journey, it was Romans 8:1. It was, there is no condemnation for those who belong to Jesus Christ. I put that everywhere in my house because
Yep.
I needed to know I wasn't condemned. I wasn't, used parts. I wasn't this damaged dude
Hmm.
because I just felt so condemned by so much and the abandonment piece from my father. Now, let me ask you, as it relates to this, comes up all the time, our example of an earthly father and how that impacts our view of a heavenly father. What did that look like for you?
I mean, I grew up without a dad. Obviously, I had my grandfather to kind of step in place, but I went to church as a kid, Catholic church with my grandfather, but it was more out of obligation. I never heard the words salvation. I never heard the words relationship. I never heard the words, uh, reconciliation or repentance. That was a very foreign word. So it wasn't until I was 27 years old till I started a relationship with the Lord and I heard the gospel for the first time. And Jesus talks about in so many places, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. I did not have those ears to hear for so many years because I'd never heard. I'm sure the words were mentioned somewhere, but it just wasn't there for me. It wasn't explained. I didn't have the ears to properly hear. And it wasn't until I was 27. And when I got the idea of who Jesus was, right, and what he had done, and I did my investigation, which I encourage everybody to do, that he was a real person that came onto this earth, and he's either, what is he, liar, lunatic, or Lord, right, as they say. And I came to the conclusion that he is Lord. He is who he says he is. And I am who he says I am, which is his child. And so when I got that, though, I think I had a lot of trouble for a long time, for probably 5-6 years, of understanding God the Father. I understood who Jesus was as the Savior and the Son of God, but God the Father was a very foreign concept to me because of Joe the Father, my dad, not being there. And so I didn't have a great example. And then I think when Sarah was born, my daughter, I really started to understand a little more of God the Father because of how I felt as Jason the father to my daughter, and how I would do anything for her, and how I loved her unconditionally, and how she still needed a stern talking to every so often. But at the same time, that was done out of love and reading. And then the more I would, become a dad and have this experiences as she would grow up, the more I would read in scripture, the more I related now to God. I'm certainly not God. None of us are, but I related to the Father's love for humanity, the Father's love for his son, the sacrifice that he made, the whole idea of loving us so much that he sent his son just so we could be connected to him. Like there's a desire, a yearning that God has for his people to want to connect with him, right? I never knew that or understood that until I became a dad. And then I saw the idea of my desire and yearning to connect to my daughter. And in connecting with her, it helped me have a better picture of who God was as Father.
Now, where did you learn how to be the godly father, the godly husband? Was it from just guys you had tried to surround yourself with, guys at church? I mean, where a reading or podcast, or what did that look like for you?
Well, it's always going to be trial by error, which I think is how every dad's got to do this, right? Nobody has it figured out. But it was from my brother, my middle brother, Chris Romano, who's my hero in the faith. He's the guy that led me to Jesus. He's the first in our family to ever become a Christian and kind of begin a walk in a journey with God. He's a pastor now. He's a Bible college president. He's a professor. He's a PhD. So he's my hero, right? And in so many facets. But I watched him as a dad, especially early on. He had a son, Sam, who was born in 2000, even before I was a Christian. And I watched him raise Sam. And it wasn't until 2004 that I became a dad. So those 4 years were very formative for me, even though I'm sure he was in the trial and error mode as well, of how to be a godly father, how to love his son, how to teach him about Jesus, how to show him God, how to be present in his life, how to take him to church, to read scripture, to pray with him. I watched that from afar, but I watched that and I said, I want to be like that. So he was really the only example I had. Now, eventually I got into a church, plugged into a church, met a lot of great godly men who were great dads, watched them. My friend Scott now is one of my best friends. He's my brother, my accountability partner, and he's one of the best dads I know. So I watch him, and I even now as a teenage dad, or a dad of a teenager, I ask him questions. What did you do when your daughter was 16? And so I'm still learning and I'm still trying to figure it out. But the initial example was my brother. And even going back, it was my grandfather, because he had so many great traits in the way that he was with us and took care of us as a grandfather. And I can't wait to be a grandfather someday and be able to try to, exemplify what he did. But as a dad, it really was one guy. It was my brother, Chris.
So what's been your biggest struggle as a father, and how have you overcome it?
Oh my gosh, there's so many struggles.
Yeah, I was gonna say you could. I just pick out one, because I know if it's me, I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, hold on a second. That's a big. That's many
Initially,
things.
yeah, I think initially it was how do I discipline in a godly way? That was, I think, the hardest thing, because I knew that she needed discipline. I wasn't going to let her run wild and rampant and do whatever she wanted. No child should be able to do that, obviously. And when they do, that's when you can kind of see the separation and the difference in those that have parents that are disciplining and those that don't. And when I say discipline, I'm not just talking about spanking or, spoons or the rod or anything like that. I'm just talking about not letting them get away with everything and do whatever they want. And there was a line there, because especially now I see it too, as she's older, the pulling away and giving her space to fail and giving her space to grow and learn and mature has gotten looser and looser since she basically turned 12 or 13 years old. And we had the reins pretty tight for many years, and they're still pretty tight. My daughter will tell you the reins are tight on her, but we've definitely struggled with figuring out the right level of pulling away and allowing her to experience what she needs to experience, and we've had some serious discussions lately about failing and mistakes, and I want her to fail and make mistakes. We all need to. That's where we learn. That's how we grow. I've just talked to her about not making the big mistakes, and I mean simply getting pregnant, or going to jail, or getting arrested, things like that. Those are very big mistakes that will affect her trajectory for the rest of her life. We can all move forward from those, and God forgives us of mistakes, but we've had really deeper conversations lately, and that's a tension for me. That really is. Where's the line to discipline her properly and not? And the disciplines change over the years. But that started really young. How do I spank my kid? Do I not spank my kid? Do we give her a timeout? Do we take away, this or that? What's the discipline problem? And what's the level? And did she do enough to earn to have to justify that discipline? Man, that's been the struggle, I think. And hopefully it's a struggle for other people and not just me. But that's one that I've been going through for 15 years now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have 3 daughters, and like with all their different personalities, and like I can use a tone with one and she totally will just start crying. I can use that same tone with another one and she's just like, okay, we're having a conversation. It's just like,
Yeah.
it's this weird. And you're right. In what I've come to know and all that, and I've got 2 now in college, and it's just kind of like, okay, Lord,
Yeah.
It's the prayer warrior thing of, God, I've done the best I could. I've screwed up a lot and continue to mess up. But
Right.
man, please wrap your hands around these little angels and just help them to stay pure, to not make those big mistakes, right? And man,
Yeah.
it's just, I don't know if I've ever prayed as much since my
Well,
girls have gone off to college.
John, I'll tell you something I'm doing now. She's again, my daughter's in high school, and you know, listen, she goes to church. She's involved in her youth group. She goes to a great camp every year, a Christian camp, and she loves Jesus. She really does. And I got to baptize her when she was 10, and it was a great privilege and honor. But she's a teenager, and every teenager is going to pull away. The world's going to pull at them. The approval, the need to seek approval from others, her peers. It's natural, right? So one of the things that I've noticed with her is, you know, she doesn't want to hang out with dad. I'm not as cool as I used to be, I guess, where she is in life. However, I have to be intentional about, first of all, praying for her like crazy, very much like you described. That's taking place now, and I'm sure it'll increase even more when she goes to college in a couple years. But I am intentionally sending her texts every single morning during the school year. And it started off the first day of her freshman year of high school. Before that, I don't know what I was doing or staying connected. Maybe it was just because she was a little bit younger. But once she hit high school, I said, I cannot lose this kid in the way that maybe I'm envisioning I could lose her. So every day, very, you know, non-intrusive, I'm sending her a text. It's usually when she gets right on the bus, about 6:30, and I say something to the effect of, here's a Bible verse, here's what God is saying in that verse, and here's how much I love you. And it's somewhere in that range. Sometimes it's just, hey, it's a positive encouragement. There's not a Bible verse in there, but the majority of these last, I don't know, 6 months or so has been me sending her a Bible verse. So I know she's getting a verse every day to look at, even if she spends 20 seconds at it. She's going to get a little explanation about it. And then just me always telling her I love her. I did not hear I love you from my dad. I don't even hear it much now, although I know he does. It's just weird for him to say it. And it's weird for me to say it to him too. But it is not weird for me to say it to my daughter. I made sure from day one she heard I love you, and I always told her. And I want to continue that. And I have no idea if she even looks at many of these texts. We've talked a little bit about it. She never responds, which is just typical teenager, right, John?
Yeah.
But I think hopefully someday she'll look back and say, okay, my dad, he cared and he shared and he loved, and through that hopefully that becomes an example that she can take to her kids and say, you know what, I can appreciate what my dad was doing to me now because I'm a mom myself to my own kids. So that's been something that I've really, whenever people say, what do you do with your daughter to stay connected, you know, we're not always going out and doing personal things together anymore. We still do, but the text, because I got to reach her where she's at, which is on her phone all the time, like every teenager. So I can reach her where she's at with the gospel and with love and telling her that I'm always going to be there for her no matter what.
Dude, and just her knowing you're pursuing her. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
That's such a big deal. Like, and here's to give you a little bit of encouragement and comfort. My oldest, who's 20, she kind of went through, and I've got a 13-year-old right now.
Yep. So,
So
you know,
the 13-year-old promised she would never be like her older sisters when she was a teenager. But it's just teenagers, right?
yeah.
But my oldest one, it's like she kind of went through that same period, but when she turned, and she's pretty mature for her age, even though she's only 20, she's kind of now looking back going, man, dad kind of knew what he was talking about. you so
I've told this. Somebody told me they're going to turn the corner at some point. You're probably seeing that right now with your 20-year-old. And I'm not seeing that yet, but I've been told they're going to turn a corner. It usually takes place between 18 and 22 when they're in college, and they start to realize, oh, all that yelling, all that discipline, all that stuff that they were doing, now I see why. So I'm hoping that corner turns pretty soon.
yeah, and you know what? It is interesting because of my 18-year-old and the 20-year-old, it's the same pattern. And my 20-year-old, it's cool to have her reach out to me now, going, "Hey, Dad,
Right.
what do you think?" You
Yep.
know, and I've erred, unfortunately, and I've learned this a lot with my girls. It's more about listening than advice.
Yeah.
They want me to just listen and not so much always giving them advice. But as
Mm-hmm.
guys, we have this tendency, I want to help you. Don't want you to mess up. And, it's that over. Oh, anyway, yeah, I hear you. Let me ask you, if you're sitting in front of a new dad for the first time, and he says, man, what's the game-changing advice you'd give me? What would you tell him?
As a new dad, I think the first thing I would say is what you said. I think I heard this from my brother actually yesterday when we had lunch together too, was um, pursue your kid, pursue your daughter. Um, Started at, you know, the first day she comes out of the womb and continue for the rest of her life, really. And there's different stages of what that looks like, obviously. I've seen the first, few stages of pursuing my kid. Find what you have in common and stay with that. I think, my daughter and I have both of a love for Star Wars, which I did not fully expect that I would have a daughter and that she would love Star Wars. She loves Star Wars. So we have that in common. She loves the New York Mets like I do. And so we watch baseball together. And there's other things that she loves that I have no interest in. So I try to pursue her every day, but then find the common ground that we have and just, keep that in the sweet spot of our journey. And I would do that with a new dad who's staring at their kid, just scared to death. Man, continue to pursue her. Man, pray for her, pray with her for as long as you can. I prayed with my daughter every night before she went to bed till she was 13. I hope she remembers that when she gets older. Now it's different. I don't, the door shuts and I'm not allowed in the room, cause she's 16. But when she was 12, 13, I remember as I saw these moments becoming fewer and far between, I was like, man, I hope she remembers when we were 7, when we were 8. And every single night I was the tucker in to bed guy. I was the dad who was there, and we would read a Bible verse or a Bible story together and talk about it and then pray. And um, just those are my encouragement, because I have no idea if I did it right. I don't know the outcome. They kind of say you don't know the seeds that you're planting on earth until you get to heaven. I don't know the seeds that I'm planting in my daughter, what's going to sprout and what's not, until she gets older. But these are the things that I've seen, at least for me, that have given me the most encouragement and joy.
Dude, that's awesome. Keep up the good work, brother. I guarantee you, you're making a much more powerful impact than you think you are. Tell us, as we begin to wrap up, the
Yeah.
first book. Tell guys what the first book was called. The title.
Yeah, it's called Live to Forgive. Kind of rhymes, and it's quite simple actually, but it's a book that tells the life of my journey with my dad that we talked about. And, but there's also a lot of application in there. It's not just my story. It's probably 30 to 40% application of how people can work towards instilling forgiveness into their lives and moving forward. So yeah, it's called Live to Forgive. Daryl Strawberry is now a friend of mine, weirdly enough, a baseball player who's had to walk through his own journey of forgiveness, wrote the foreword to it. And it's got a lot of endorsements. And it's been a neat thing to see over the last couple of years how it's impacted people's lives. And man, I can't tell you, John, how many people, and you probably know this with your movie and your book, how many people struggle with forgiveness. It's incredible. It's such an epidemic. It really is. And, I'm grateful that my book can play a tiny, tiny part, and my story can play a tiny part in helping others to enter a place of forgiving someone that hurt them in their lives. So yeah, it's called Live to Forgive, and it's available everywhere.
So, and the new book is called what?
It's called The Uniform of Leadership. It's really a pivot from the first book. It's not a sequel or anything like that. Somebody jokingly said, you should call the second book Live to Forget. And I said, yeah, that's not happening. But it's the second book is the book, if I was ever to write a book, and I didn't ever want to write any books, to be quite honest with you. The second book was the book that I envisioned that I would probably write someday, which was a collection of stories that I had from experiences of working at ESPN. But we turned it into a leadership book because I've had the privilege and honor of spending many, many days and hours with some of the biggest names in sports, not just at ESPN, but athletes in the world of sports, people like Drew Brees and Tony Dungy, and even actors like The Rock and others, and being able to spend time with them for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time at ESPN because of the job that I held. I came across so many stories. So people would always ask me, like you did, what was it like to work at ESPN? Who were some of the people that you met? What was it like what were some of the lessons that you learned? Well, that's what this book is. It's leadership lessons that I learned from the people I spent time with at ESPN. And it's not just the big name celebrity athlete. It's the cashier at the cafeteria, Tammy, who taught me more about leadership than any person I ever worked with at ESPN. It's about 2 great women, Carol and Lisa, who are the best bosses and colleagues I've ever had. and people that you would never have heard of, but it's a combination of all the different people and stories that I had over 17 years. It's a long time. And just kind of sharing them in a way that is encouraging. They're leadership lessons that are timeless. They're the same lessons you would read in other leadership books, but it's all told through a biblical lens and through scripture. And the greatest model of leadership we'll ever know is Jesus, who said, "I came not to be served, but to serve." And so when you look at Jesus's model of leadership, that's where this book really stems from, is seeing how Jesus led and seeing some of those examples in the people that I worked with during my time at ESPN.
And that comes out when?
The Uniform of Leadership comes out July 21st. I'm really excited about it this summer, and it's going to be available everywhere. It'll be a hardcover book, which I'm really pumped about. The first book is a soft cover, Live to Forgive, and it's a great book. I really do want people to pick up Live to Forgive if they can. But this second book is more of the project, like I said, that I would envision having written if anybody ever came up to me and said, "Do you want to write a book? What would it be about?" So it comes out July 21st. It'll be available everywhere. And really excited about it. Super excited.
How can people connect with you, man? Social media?
Social media, of course. I'm on Twitter a lot. That's probably my go-to, but I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. And then my website is just my name, jasonromano.com. You can find out more information about the new book. You can actually read the first chapter of Live to Forgive for free on the website. See if it's something that you would want to get. And then just some information about speaking and a blog that's on there that I haven't really updated in a while, and some pictures and things. But yeah, just at my website is really like the home base for all of what I'm doing and working on.
Dude, I love it. Man, I know
Thank you,
you're
buddy.
super busy, brother, and I greatly appreciate you just taking the time to visit with me today, dude.
John, it's an honor. I appreciate all you're doing for dads and all you're doing for the kingdom, and it's really an honor for you to have me on your show. Thanks so much.
Hey, we'll catch up again soon, bro.
You got it.
See you,
Absolutely.
man.
See you, buddy.